Hi, everyone. We are going to dive right into this week's chapter. So, this week we're going to be covering counseling with young children ages 5 to 8 and their families. Once again, this is a really rich chapter full of great takeaways and great information, but these are the ones that we're going to cover today in this video. Some of the key takeaways from this chapter I want to talk about are being in a new environment, going to school, the impact of COVID, some cognitive and psychosocial growth, reasons and needs for counseling interventions, and then we're going to talk about some of those developmentally appropriate interventions together. I pulled this quote from the chapter. Between the ages of 5 to 8, children in the United States spent an average of a third of their waking hours in formal school settings before the COVID 19 pandemic. So, obviously, one of the biggest transitions during this time, this age frame of 5 years old to 8 years old, is the introduction of school. Children before 5 can be in daycare, they can be homeschooled in the sense that, I guess, home daycare, so not homeschooling, but they can be staying at home with a family member, whether that be a stay at home parent or other existing family members, maybe some grandparents, aunts, uncles. So it's really at the age of 5 when kindergarten starts and comes online that we start to see this mainstream of children being in school and being in this new environment. So, with this environment, there's going to come a lot of different sources, right? So, before the age of 5, the most common reasons for coming to therapy or for using interventions is going to be more diverse. Now that age 5 happens, we're introducing another system, we're introducing another opportunity for there to be multiple reasons to come. So I thought it was interesting just to put this up here, the average of a third of their waking hours in formal school settings. So that doesn't include maybe before school care or after care, if they're involved in sports or any extracurricular activities. So just recognizing that this is a huge system that they're a part of that's going to be pretty influential. The other key takeaway I wanted to talk about was COVID. So, obviously, COVID changed a lot of things for those that were in school in this age range during 2020. And the impacts of that, the book does a great job of talking about, there might be implications. We don't really know what the implications are going to be long term. And I can say with confidence that even just 4 years later from the onset of the pandemic, we're already starting to see a lot of the impact and the effect of the COVID 19 pandemic on education and on school aged children. So, when they were reintegrating and coming back, I know I have several school teachers in my family, and I know that they have all experienced the pressures to get children back on track or to make up for lost time and some of the skills that they would have learned in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, they did not. And so, what does that look like to teach potentially, kindergarten skills to a fourth grader now, or first grade skills to a second grader who came back? So, it's definitely shifted things quite a bit. And so, just being aware that there's going to continue to be a lot of research and a lot of evidence emerging about the impact of COVID on generations for years to come. So that's something to look forward to for both disciplines, whether you're going to be a school counselor or a mental health counselor in the community, is just to pay attention to all the different research that's going to continue to come out. Something else I want to just put out there for those of you who don't plan on seeing children or adolescents in your practice, think about how old your adult clients were in 2020 when you see them. I know for me, it's very interesting. If I see an 18-year-old right now, they were 14 when the pandemic started, which means that they were, most likely they were in their freshman year of high school, potentially eighth grade, just depending on how their birthday falls. But it's interesting to be able to go back and maybe reference if there are some skills or some different maybe social things that your client's experiencing as an adult. It could potentially trace back to some changes in their life, focusing around COVID. So if you're not planning on seeing children and adolescents, I would still encourage you to assess for this. Think about how old your adult clients were in 2020, because as we continue to get away from 2020, the likelihood of you seeing an adult person who maybe was 8, 9, 10 years old in 2020 is obviously going to eventually happen. So this is a phenomenon that I encounter now, even about 9/11. There have been a few clients I've had over the years who were in the daycare that was in the World Trade Center during the attack. So just really interesting to be aware of some of these larger societal traumas or shared experiences of disruption in developmental growth and things like that, and just be aware of that. So might be an interesting thing to assess for moving forward, especially like I said, the more distance that we have from 2020. So another quote that I really liked was the disparity in the estimated number of children needing mental health care and the number who actually receive it has only grown in the last decade. And I will say this is where our lovely school counselors come into play. So if you are on the school counseling track and you have been waiting patiently in the wings and learning all the things that I've been talking about our community mental health care settings or private practice settings, I want to say that this chapter is 100% for you. This is where you come online and come into play. So one of the or I guess the greatest number of children who actually did receive services, they saw a school counselor, a school psychologist, or a school social worker. So school counselors, we cannot underestimate the value of having you in the schools, of having you be a resource because of this disparity in the amount of children that need care and then in the ones that receive it. Obviously, there's a lot more to be said for multiculturalism and the different populations and races that receive or don't receive mental health care. So just be aware of this as you are entering the field as a school counselor or as a mental health counselor. Just the need is so great. I mean, our job security is wild, and we can thank a lot of things for that. But the COVID-19 pandemic for sure is going to continue to solidify the need for school counselors and the mental health professionals. So we're going to be talking a lot more about the role of school counselors today because this age group, this 5 to 8, they are going to most likely be referred. The first level of care is going to be within the school of being a school counselor, psychologist, or social workers. So just know that there's definitely a lot of work to be done and a lot of people to be seen. So the cognitive and psychosocial growth during this time period, there's a huge growth in capacity and ability during these years. If you think about the difference between a 3-year-old, maybe they are potty training or they are sleep training again, or they're learning even how to join sentences together and speak more. And then you think about, the capacity of a 6 or 7-year-old. That's huge. There's a huge difference there in the ability of independence and being able to make decisions for themselves. Kind of one of the, I guess, truths in my family that I've heard from multiple generations in my family is that a person is raised by the time they're in the first grade, which I think is an interesting concept. But who people are and their core identities really start to develop during this time. And so the ages of 5, 6, and 7 and 8 are really pivotal in helping them gain this independence and have the ability to start to self-identify and individualize within themselves. So they can remember sequences of commands more, they can control their own behavior, and they can plan action. So the ability to communicate verbally to a 5, 6, 7, or 8-year-old is much, much, much different than a 1, 2, 3, or 4-year-old. However, they're in an in-between, right? So they're having this cognitive growth, they're having this brain development that's still so large, but they're not quite to the ability to think abstractly like we'll see in some of these later ages that are going to come into play over the next 2 weeks as we move into early adolescence and the teenage years. So the book introduced these 3 cognitive developments, I guess, of reversibility, sociocentrism, and decentration. They do a really great job of giving examples of what each of those things are, and I'm going to let you look at those on page 258 in each of those examples. But basically, that it's more of talking about that in-between space where there's more changes and advancements that are taking place. to create more concrete operational thinkers instead of the abstract, like I said, that we'll get into later. They are developing an internal locus of control around this time. And another quote that I liked, or another phrase, is that they're learning what behaviors please adults and peers. So I would say that they're kind of sponges. They're soaking in their environment, but they're also learning social awareness and they're learning social cues. Friendships are huge during this time period, and the book highlighted that best friendships are a really big deal, especially the intensity around them is present, I would say, for, all genders, but specifically with females. If you are a female person and you can reflect on your own experience with friendships in kindergarten, first and second grade, you might be able to relate to what the book is talking about some of the intensity. So the friendships are important. They have sources of validation and self-worth, and just this is really the first time that they start to interact with, kind of that empathy, like how do my actions, or how do I as a person impact the people and the environment around me. So this next slide, imaginative play is a huge part of this. While there's so many different changes cognitively and psychosocially, and they are moving towards being more able to grapple with language and speech, they're not quite there, and they really, really need still that play, and that element of play is so important, and that imaginative play. So I found this graphic, and there's a ton of these on Pinterest. You can find a ton of posters that talk about the benefits of imaginative play. So this one specifically shares that provides opportunities for countless types of problem solving. So again, this is when they start to interact with others and be able to use some of those social skills. And those, I like to use the phrase pro-social. That's a big word in child development, is that what are the behaviors they're showing that is contributing to their social life around them. It develops creativity and future out-of-the-box thinkers. Imaginative play encourages a rich vocabulary, learning and retaining new words, helps encourage perspective taking and empathy towards others. It's great practice for real life skills, so pretend play. I know that Knoxville has one of these. It's like a village. I don't know what it's called, but they literally have like a little town that they've created where you can take children in this age group, may have like a grocery store and a post office and all these different, literally like villages, and they can role play and pretend all the different jobs and careers that it takes to make up a little town. So it's really, really fun. But a lot of children's museums, you'll see, they'll have these types of centers where they can grocery shop or pretend to check out people, or maybe they can be a librarian. So definitely look into the community that you're in and try to find those places, because it's really great to help parents be able to encourage imaginative play. And then it allows for role playing to cope with new or difficult circumstances. So imaginative play is huge, and in this age group, I want you to think, and I didn't add any videos or anything this week because I think I've already belabored my point on technology and the impact of it, but I want you to think about, the impact of us sticking an iPad in front of a 6-year-old instead of letting them go outside in nature, or forcing them to be in their room with blocks or toys or dress up clothes or other things that kind of requires them to use their imagination. So I'm really interested in that. That's always something that I like to ask my parents of clients in this age group is, tell me about their imaginative play. How much would you say that they get to engage in that? And it's really an opportunity for me to educate, and maybe that's something they've never thought of before. Maybe the phrase imaginative play is not something that they've ever heard of. So just something to be mindful of is just, are we giving our kids opportunities to use their imagination anymore? Because that's so important to develop all of these skills for their life at that age and then moving forward in the future. Moving right along. So reason or need for counseling interventions in this stage. School-related behavior is a huge, behavioral problems is a huge one. That's probably one of, if not the biggest reason that I see children in this age group second to trauma, but that's just because of my training. I'm kind of known for being willing to treat children with trauma and emotional problems, organic problems. So this would be organic problems for me would be like some of the specific diagnoses that we're going to discuss on the next slide, or maybe there is a physical delay or some type of medical illness, something that's going on with their physical body that would require them to need counseling interventions. Problems occurring within the family, so divorce, separation is huge during this time. The book shared a resource, When Mom and Dad Separate. That's a great book. I really like that one. I think it's a great resource to have in your pocket. And then, of course, just parenting, as we've talked about in the past, especially with the Deepest Well, just parenting skills and the stability and the consistency about what the child is experiencing in their life. So those are the biggest reasons for counseling interventions. The book discusses and highlights 3 specific diagnoses. So ADHD, which again we've talked about a lot. I hope that what this section of the chapter could uniquely provide that we haven't talked about is just the amount of percentages, the increase of diagnosis for ADHD, and then just the breakdown between boys and girls, and also the socioeconomic implications of ADHD diagnosis. And if you look at the very end of the chapter when they give like key takeaways, or I can't remember how they highlight it, but basically, what I hope that you get out of this is just the extreme caution that needs to be used when you're making a diagnosis of a child, whether it be ADHD, ODD, or any of these others. When there is a potential that teachers and or parents might just need different set of skills in order to work with that child. Not to say that some kids don't genuinely have ADHD, ODD, or specific learning disabilities, but just to remember the things that we learned in the Deepest Well and recognize that it's not always that simple. There are a lot that have been diagnosed. There have also been a lot that have been misdiagnosed. And because of the type of medication and the intensity that the medication is, I would highly suggest you being cautious in assigning this diagnosis before, or I guess in isolation without consulting with a pediatrician, or if you are if you're not a school-based therapist, if you are in private practice, reaching out to the school therapist and having that combination of knowing how that child is experiencing the environment of school, how they are at home, how they are at school, how they're with other people, to be able to appropriately diagnose. What I like about forms, and you'll see this in your diagnostic class, when you are diagnosing ADHD for a child, there is literally like a questionnaire that goes to the pediatrician. There's a questionnaire that goes to the teacher. There's a questionnaire that goes home with mom and dad. If mom and dad are in separate houses, mom fills out one, dad fills out one. And the forms and the questionnaire is to really identify, are these symptoms present in all spheres of their life? Or is it that, at home, they're very in control, they're very obedient, they're very able to stay on task, and then it's only in the school environment? Well, then that would tell you something about the school environment that could potentially change outside of medication to make that more successful for the child. So again, when you get into more diagnosis, you'll see the specific forms, but that's what I like about ADHD, is that it really doesn't need to be looked at in isolation of just one environment. It needs to be looking at all different spheres of where the child is in his or her life. So the next diagnosis that they discuss is oppositional defiant disorder. This, if you're going to be a school-based therapist, ADHD and ODD are going to be massive for you. Oppositional defiant disorder is the most common diagnosed mental health disorder among children, which is just absolutely insane because it should not be as high as it is. But you will see, again, as a school-based counselor, that oppositional defiant disorder has become the umbrella for, I would say, very stigmatized, negative labels that we want to put on children, whether that be boys that are bad listeners, or they are not they're disobedient, or they are hostile. ODD gets slapped on children quite a bit, and more boys are diagnosed with ODD than girls. And the tantrums and bad relationships and frequent disciplinary problems in school highlight those with ODD. Um, it is not uncommon for children who are diagnosed with ODD to end up being hospitalized at some point. They might be so aggressive towards a teacher or a peer. It's usually a teacher, it's usually an adult, but for them to be so aggressive towards a teacher that the police may be involved, and they may end up going to a inpatient facility for a few days. Parkwood, uh, near South Haven, Mississippi, Olive Branch, South Haven area, they actually have a child unit, um, and which means that they will take children under the age of 10. They also have a cottage at Parkwood where young children can go until they are medicated and stabilized. So there, that is not uncommon, and Parkwood is certainly not the only hospital that has those services. It's just the one that's in our area. So to be aware of if you practice in Oxford or anywhere in North Mississippi, Parkwood is going to be kind of your place for everything. They'll see anybody, and for a lot of different reasons. But ODD is later in life. It's very connected to antisocial personality disorders, more depression, more anxiety. So these are the kids that you will have the hardest time connecting with, but if you can connect with them, it can make all the difference. They have very, very thick shells, and it can be very hard to have them buy into the therapy process. There is a defiance, a distrust with adults for those that have ODD. And honestly, I mean, you think about it, if you're a teacher and you have 20 people in your class, if you have even one child that's diagnosed with ODD, that can cause so much disruption to the classroom, it's exhausting. If you have two, wow, that's really exhausting. Um, so they highlight just the need to be aware of really the overdiagnosis, but also if you really do have a child that's truly dealing with this, that there are significant anatomical brain differences, that it is a real diagnosis. Back when I was in school and learning about ODD, there was a lot of controversy on if it should have been included in the DSM, just because a lot of people thought it was more behavior, more like, instead of nature, it was definitely a nurtured type situation. But they've done so much research and so many studies and brain scans specifically that it actually highlights that the brain is different. And, you know, from what we've learned in the deepest well, and just from some other trainings and experience that I've had, trauma affects the brain, right? So I think it's probably a both and. But I think it's important to note that while maybe not every student that you see that's being diagnosed with ODD has it, that there are children who genuinely do have ODD, and that it is a real thing, that it is not just something that can be fixed, if their parents just treated them differently. Now, do their parents need support? Absolutely. Can a large benefit come in helping them by training parents? 100%. Also, yes. So it's your job as a school counselor to try to find a way to help the adults in that child's life kind of decode that kid and learn how they tick, learn what motivates them, and learn how to improve their environment, because the more stressed and activated they are, the more escalating they're going to be, and the more outbursts they're going to show and exhibit. And that's really hard, because after a while, like I said, those kids make it really, really tough to have patience, and those kids make it tough sometimes to like them. And in a school setting, if a child is not liked, it is usually a mutual dislike amongst other adults. And so it's important to be able to harness and reserve some of that judgment for the sake of the child, to be able to have a stress reduced environment and also be able to see those skills and coping mechanisms that come into play of feeling really, really activated in high stress situations. So that's just my soapbox for ODD. It definitely exists, but a lot of support, a lot of unconditional positive regard, a lot of telling yourself that that child is a child and they are not manipulative or deceptive. They are good, they are internally good, and they have good qualities about them. And it's just you kind of unlocking and finding the way to connect with them. The next thing that they talk about are specific learning disabilities. So, probably for those of you, as you were in school, you're probably really familiar with dyslexia. I would say that is probably one of the most, I don't know, normalized specific learning disabilities. But knowing that this is a significant problem in processing information, reading, math, or another academic area. So, this was another thing that was added in the DSM that was helpful because I think, again, dyslexia kind of took over, and that was the only thing that was really services were ever really rendered for. So places like Sylvan Learning, I don't know if y'all remember seeing commercials for those places, but places like that in the community that exist to try to help tutor children that have specific learning disabilities. So I think in this area, the school environment is not built for kids that are outside of the norm, quote unquote, and y'all can't see me, but I'm using air quotes right now. And so, again, your job as a counselor is to recognize that there are resources and then connecting both the child and the parent to those resources, but also sometimes the teachers. I will say, teachers and teacher training has gotten so much better about these areas, about educating and helping teachers understand what they can do to help children that have specific learning disabilities. That is only getting better, but that's definitely an area, if you're going to be a school-based therapist, to dig into a little bit more about just the interventions that can be helpful with this. They took an opportunity in the specific learning disabilities section to talk about the process of grief with parents when parents learn and understand that their child might have a diagnosis. And I'll say that that applies for anything, not just specific learning disabilities, but just having some compassion and empathy for parents as they are grappling with a disability that their child might be experiencing. And also knowing that at the root of it, there's a lot of fear for the parent. Fear that their child is going to be treated differently, fear that their child's not going to succeed or excel as they hoped. So just recognizing that as you are diagnosing, that there can be so much power and so much relief that comes from a parent knowing what's going on, but there can also be a mixture of emotion, of grief, sadness, fear at not knowing how to really handle this. So just being aware that while the child is going through this, the parent's going through it too, and there's a lot of emotions at play. So we're going to move on to developmentally appropriate interventions. And what I really liked that the book highlighted is that, you can adapt almost anything about skills or forms of counseling, but it's got to incorporate some type of play. So play is so healing, it's so important, and it's just a huge key element of adapting any theoretical orientation to work with children is you got to have some element of play. So they discuss two big waves, and I'm really, really excited about this because child-centered play therapy, I'm definitely biased. It is a modality that I'm trained in. I received training from Dr. Gary Landreth himself, who is one of the pivotal, I would say more modern day theorists of child-centered play therapy and developers of that. Virginia Axeline is credited with being the founder of child-centered play therapy, and I've mentioned Dibs in Search of Self before. It's such a great book. I may have said this before, but I read it in one sitting on a plane, and it was so good. I couldn't put it down. So definitely, if you're going to be doing child-centered play therapy, or if you're interested in it at all, These are kind of like the two key texts of child-centered play therapy, DIBS, and that's going to be more of a narrative case study example of her work with DIBS, and then child-centered play therapy, which this is more like a manual and how to do it, and they're really, really helpful. Also, Gary Landreth has a ton of supplemental materials and videos on YouTube that are examples of him practicing child-centered play therapy. So the child-centered play therapy, I guess, hub right now is the University of North Texas in Denton, north of Dallas, and that is where Gary Landreth came from. He still does some things there, like workshops, but he was a veteran teacher in that department. And then most of the research is coming out of UNT with Dee Ray and Gary Landreth's counterpart, Sue Braden. So a lot of I'm almost positive that if you were to look at one of the more renowned play therapy research articles, it's probably going to have Dee Ray or Sue Braden involved in it somehow. So Virginia Axeline, she developed 8 core principles of child-centered play therapy that the book shares. I'm not going to go through all 8 of these, but they're very, very similar to the Rogerian, Carl Rogers modality theory, person-centered, very person-centered, and just the belief that the child can actually move themselves through what they need to in order to heal. So they talk about 4 big waves of play therapy, or the 4 I guess skills that you need in order to do child-centered play therapy, and that structuring, which is just how you set up the sessions. So this is really important when you meet with the parent to discuss how the sessions are going to go. Are you going to meet with the child 30 minutes, 45 minutes? How are you going to handle whether or not you talk to the parent or guardian? Are they going to be allowed to be in the playroom? Those types of things. And then empathic responding, which another word for that is tracking. And that is just where you are basically just verbally saying what the child is doing without putting labels on it. So if a child is playing with a blue car, I would never say, "Oh, you're playing with a blue car," because I don't want to label that. So I'd say, "Oh, I can see that you're really interested in playing with that." And while that sounds really silly and funny and, kind of basic, it's very, very, very challenging to be present with a child for 30 to 45 minutes and just track what they're doing out loud and come up with different ways to say what they're doing. And the purpose of that is to let the child know that you're with them, you're paying attention with them, and that you're present, and that you are fully focused on what they're doing. So it can seem really odd in the beginning to do this, and it definitely takes a lot of practice where you do it where you don't feel like a weirdo, that you're just, "Oh, you're playing with that. Oh, I can see how happy that sound makes you. You like making that noise. You like opening and closing that. You like jumping up and down." Certain things like that, when you see the behavior. You're paying attention to their affect, which the book talks about, as you get better with this skill of tracking and empathic responding, is that you move from what they're doing to how they're feeling while they're doing it. So if you see that maybe they pick up a toy snake and they throw it across the room and they stomp their feet and look mad, your tracking statement might be, "Oh, you threw that so hard and it made you angry." And that's a way for them to clarify and almost an invitation for them to speak back to you. So another core belief in play therapy is that play is their language and toys are their words. And so what the child is doing, it does not require words to it, that they are working themselves through what they need to. So before I go any further, I'll say that this technique sounds really simple, and it is, but the challenge of it is trusting the process and knowing that what you're doing is actually doing something. And I'll loop back to that in just a minute. But the next skill after empathic responding / tracking is imaginative play. So again, what I talked about earlier about the power of imaginative play is to allow them to be in control and to let their brain take you where it needs to go, and letting them be the driver and you are a passenger to their play. And then the last skill is limit setting. So, because child centered play therapy, you pretty much start the session and you say, this is the playroom. You can say or do anything you like in here. If there's something that you can't do, I'll let you know. And after that, you really don't say anything. They kind of take it from there. Or if you do say something, you're tracking, or it's in response to something that they're prompting you to say. So, they might say, here, put on this police hat and carry this badge. And then they might say, you tell me no when I do this. Well, then you're following directions. So you're putting them in a position to lead you, and you are not leading them. And that's why I think a lot of people don't like child-centered play therapy, is because it requires a lot of trust and a lot of sitting back, and you feel like you're not doing anything, but the power of it is really just unbelievable. So to give them that permissive environment, it has to be safe too. And limit setting is where that comes into play. Oh man, I can see that you really, really want to throw that ball at me, but people are not for hurting. You cannot throw that ball at me. If you want to throw the ball, you can throw it at the wall or you can throw it on the floor. So that's how we set limits, using that ACT model that we talked about early on in the semester. Another limit setting that I have in the playroom at my practice is I don't let them climb on my shelves. That is dangerous. They could hurt themselves. And also, I don't really trust that my shelves are anchored super securely. So if they want to climb that, I was like, oh, I can see that you really want to climb my shelf. In here, that's not something you can do. If you want to climb, maybe you can climb on the table and chairs and get back down. I have like a very, very, very small, low to the ground kids' table and chairs, and if they were to fall off of it, it would be like a step stool. So I usually find some other way for them to achieve what they're trying to achieve, but to do it in a safe way. Another thing that I'll say about limit setting is don't put something in the room that's going to tempt a child if you really are not okay with them using it. And so my example for this is paint. I cannot stand paint. It is a distraction for me because I'm worried. It makes me anxious. I'm too worried about them getting it on the carpet or painting the walls or getting it on their clothes. And that is something that would be a distraction for me and would take me out of the ability to be present in what they're doing. I would be very distracted and it would be very noisy in my brain if they chose to play with paint. And so I don't have paint in my playroom at all, even though it's something that's listed as an item to supply them, because I know that. I know that that paint and the presence of it is not beneficial, because ultimately it incapacitates me and my ability to show up for that client. So just asking yourself about, if you're in your playroom, what are the things that you want to supply them to play with that's not going to be such a distraction and not going to require you to set a limit. I'm not going to have paint in my room if I know I don't want them to use it, so that every time they touch it, I say, oh, I know you want to paint in here, but that's not something you can do. Well, it's not really fair. It's like tempting them for no reason. So that's kind of my plug for limit setting. But like I said, because of how simple these skills are and the power that can come from them, I think a lot of counselors in training end up using child-centered play therapy, but there grows this frustration because it's like, I don't really think this is doing anything. I'm not seeing them move through any steps. I'm not seeing them fix anything. It doesn't satisfy our adult need to have a solution. It doesn't satisfy our adult need to understand and know what's going on. And so I will say, if you're going to practice child-centered play therapy, just be aware of the ambiguity that's needed. One of my favorite examples is a kid that I saw, and he would pull out snakes every session and set them up around the room, and he would lead me through them and show me where to step so that I wouldn't get attacked by the snakes. He did this over and over and over and over again, which is something that is very common in play therapy. In the same way that when we talk about our trauma, we talk about the same thing over and over again in order for us to move through it and work through it. Kids will do that with toys and with play. And to this day, I have no clue what the snakes represented or what they meant. One day he came in, laid the snakes out, we walked through it. He went and found a toy sword that I had in the room, and he pretended to slice all of their heads off, put the sword away, and said, "Okay, the snakes are all gone. I don't need to come back anymore." And that was it. That was the last time that I saw that kid. And in meeting with his parents, there was a lot of self confidence they saw grow in him, and we could never figure out what the snakes meant. But that wasn't really the goal, it wasn't really my job. He did what he needed to do, and the issues that they were experiencing outside of the session were getting better. He was not as aggressive, he was not as anxious at home, he was not getting in trouble at school as often. So it's kind of amazing that he was able to work through the snakes in his life, whatever that represented. So, again, it's suspending our adult need in order to allow the child to have a permissive space to be able to explore and work through their stuff. So, for those of you, if you end up doing any work at COPE, if you end up doing practicum and internship there, which I believe you're all required to do now, you will be experienced at child-centered play therapy. And what I'll say is that give it a chance. But instead of just doing and going through these motions, really dig into the why, dig into these 8 core principles, and challenge yourself and your preconceived notions. I'll go back to what I said about choosing your theory. If you're just doing things and you don't know why you're doing them, you're going to feel imposter syndrome all over the place. You're going to feel like you're not doing anything. And so it's really important to know the why and to know where this is coming from. And if you're a person that at your core, you just don't believe that kids have it in them to be trusted, quote unquote, to move themselves through this experience, then you're probably not going to enjoy child-centered play therapy. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I would just say, if you're ever given that opportunity, give it a chance and do it and see the power that can come from it, even if you are a skeptic, even if you don't fully know what you're doing. But know that while it sounds really simple, it's really, really hard, and it takes a lot of practice and a lot of going through the therapeutic relationship with multiple kids to see sometimes that what you're doing is working. So I won't talk any more about that, even though I totally could, because I'm biased because that's what I practice and that's what I'm trained in. They expand and offer person-centered consultation in schools and clinical settings. I thought this was so fascinating, and I'm also pretty sure this was from Dee Ray. I think she did a research study that showed that this can help teachers release stress and find workable solutions. That if you just do 8 10-minute sessions of person-centered teacher consultation, it will decrease teacher stress, which is kind of amazing. Basically, just you being present and focusing on the person over the problem can give them an opportunity to feel more empowered in their role and reduce overall stress, which we know if the teacher is less stressed, then those kids that might have ADD, ADHD, ODD, or other learning behaviors, they're going to have a better outcome in the classroom because their teacher isn't as stressed out. So this focuses on reflecting content, reflecting feelings, confrontation, and enlarging the meaning of narratives. So again, it says person-centered consultation. You're essentially being a person-centered therapist, but instead of doing hour-long sessions over an undetermined amount of time, it's very short 10-minute sessions, and it shows even just 10 minutes, maybe a week, once a week, can really benefit you. So for those of you who are going to be school counselors, I would definitely advocate you brushing up on your person-centered consultation skills and trying to implement this with as many teachers as you can. The other big branch is very different from child-centered play therapy, and that is solution-focused brief counseling techniques. So for as non-directive as child-centered play therapy is, that is how directive solution-focused is. I like solution-focused therapy. I think it's really, really helpful in school settings, and there's a reason why it's one of the most popular theories that's utilized. And it's for short-term focused approaches. So they talk about 6 rules of effective use of SFBC. And again, I won't go through each of these, but I wanted to highlight the miracle question. Every single master student in training loves the miracle question, and I do too. So I'm not picking on you, but the miracle question is definitely a big draw for a lot of people. Is that if you woke up tomorrow and a miracle happened overnight while you were asleep and the problem disappeared, what would your life be like? Another way I like to ask the miracle question is, especially when it comes to kids, is a magic wand. If Miss Jana had a magic wand right now and could wave it, what would you want to happen? They give a lot of good advice on how to dig past surface level stuff. I would like a Nintendo Switch. Okay, well, maybe let's think deeper. What would you like to be different in your family? What would you like to be different at school? What would you like to be different with your friends? And it helps you really target and focus on what the problem is. Another big part of solution focused is only focusing on the present. It's not going into the history. That's the part for me in private practice that holds me up. I get too curious about the why and where all these things came from. So if I see a 70-year-old woman, I want to know about their life when they were 5 and how things that happened to them when they were 5 might play into who they are at 70 years old. That's just who I am as a counselor. That's how I tick. That might not be the way that you tick. And certainly if you see an 8-year-old at school and that's very time sensitive, you're not going to have the ability to dig into the past as much as maybe you'd like, even in their 8 years. So I like that it focuses on the present and it focuses on action and solutions. So I think what's also really nice about solution-focused brief counseling, this is how adults think. When adults think about their kid going to counseling or themselves going to counseling, most often they think there's going to be a problem and we're going to target the problem and we're going to fix it. And because of that, school counselors, this is going to help you be able to communicate with teachers. It's going to be able to help you communicate with parents. And it's going to be able to help you track change and progress really, really nicely because they're going to be specific core goals. So that's why I think solution focused is one of the most popular theoretical orientations and interventions used in the school setting for those reasons, because it's very directive and you can track it and it's very easy to communicate with other people involved. I wanted to say, I know last week I talked about supporting parents and just thinking of the parents. This week I wanted to say, support teachers and think of the teachers, especially school counseling folks. Y'all are going to be up against a lot. Y'all will have a lot of different roles and hats to wear, and so will the teachers. And as we, full circle moment, all of the implications from the COVID-19 pandemic, to expect teachers to be able to make up for that or fill in the gaps, and then to be able to expect school counselors to fill the gaps, it's a lot and it's hard. And what I'll say is that, collaborating with teachers and having good relationships with them is going to help you. It's going to serve you well. If you are a private practice-based or mental health community-based therapist and you're working with children in this age group, reach out and try to build connections in the community, build connections with the school, get to know, or be willing. I'll say be willing to get to know the school therapists and be willing to get to know the teachers in the school. Like I said last week, I know that that's not always applicable to the point that it's very idealized, but just being willing to grow those relationships as they are made available to you and as there's interest. Just because, 5 to 8 year olds, there's just a wide spectrum of energy, ability, family experiences, life experiences, diagnoses, non-diagnoses, and for you to have that support to be able to give to them, it really does. It takes a village. So that's what I wanted to say about that. And because for elementary school kids, the front lines for mental health care is going to be you guys. It's going to be the school counselors. And then second to that, if, interventions aren't being able to be accommodated during school hours, that's where they end up needing additional support outside for people like me. And then for issues that cannot be dealt with solution focused brief therapy, those are usually the kiddos that I see. Like I mentioned before, trauma, things that can't be dealt with in the school in isolation is what ends up coming into the community. So the last thing I'll say is that this week you do not have an assignment due. You do not have anything to turn in. I know I will be celebrating Easter. If you are not celebrating Easter, I hope that you enjoy a slower week and no pressure from this course to turn anything in. It might be a great opportunity for you to get a jump start on watching and doing your video reflection. I will go ahead and post instructions for that so that you can get started working on that. And yeah, that's all we have for this week. So if you celebrate Easter, I hope you have a great Easter. And if not, I hope you have a great weekend anyway.